Jim, everyone. Appreciate people being here on a Friday afternoon. It is a beautiful day here on the farm from where I sit. Want to take some time just to speak a little bit about what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about as I look at the state of the system, and also talk a little bit about the convert penalty system, which I think is quite an interesting development in the grand scheme of things and warrants a little bit more conversation. So I think the first thing to address or talk about is the price. And people may say 73 cents price has been slowly leaking over the past month or so from its value target down to where it is now. And we're approaching the local low again for the price. And glass half empty attitude is this thing's not working. Why isn't it at its value target? I think one of the main reasons why we moved away from the term value peg is for exactly this reason, to respond to this perspective where the trade-off space that Pinto is operating in is such that in exchange for scalability, there is a necessary trade-off in stability. And this is something we spoke about a little while back, talking about the stablecoin trilemma and how Pinto makes this trade-off where it favors having some, and there's a question of what is reasonable, what amount of deviation, what magnitude, what length of deviation would cause the currency to lose its utility. But it makes that trade-off in exchange for theoretically near infinite scalability. And the glass half empty attitude would say, well, scalability, why don't you get the thing to work and be at its value target and then worry about scalability? And from where I sit, this is the only way to do it, where ultimately the protocol cannot keep the price of Pinto at its value target at all times. And instead, the name of the game is, to what extent can the protocol minimize the length of deviations and the magnitude of deviations from the value target? And at this point, it's been about a month, just under a month, since the protocol crossed its value target. This is the longest deviation from its value target, or close to it, depending on how you count. Like if you say the previous extended deviation where it sort of hung out in the 90s and then dipped down quite significantly, that lasted a similar amount of time. I'm looking at the data now. It seems like that was from the end of January, just about, until it repegged in the very beginning of March. So just about a month. And we're approaching another month-long deviation below the value target. The shape of this one is slightly different, whereas the last one, the protocol stayed at about in the 90s for the better part of that month of deviation. So it was a slight deviation for 3 weeks or so. This time it was more of a violent, I don't know if violent is the right word, but it's definitely been, okay. So I'm looking at the data. It seems like the last time we were at peg was on the 5th. So at this point, it's only been slightly over 3 weeks since the deviation started. But the deviation was sharper in magnitude, meaning that the protocol dipped, the price of the currency dipped more faster. And I don't think we're at the point where we can make any value judgments about the magnitude of the deviation and the length of the deviation. Obviously, uh, smaller deviations are better and shorter deviations are better. But in the grand scheme of things, we really are only just in the discovery phase in terms of what is the level of efficacy of the model. And I think it's worth saying, even prior to the exploit, Beanstalk, to the best of my recollection, also experienced quite lengthy deviations from its value target for extended periods of time. And in many ways, the crux, like the way I think about it, is the optimal deviation from peg is one that is hard but fast, meaning that the magnitude of the deviation is relatively high, whereas the length of the deviation is relatively low. And ideally, what the system would be able to create is, let's say that there's a growth period and new demand has entered the protocol, and now there's a deviation from the value target. The hope is that the incentive structures are such that all of the participants that are likely to leave during this deviation all leave relatively quickly. And the faster that they leave, and particularly if they all leave at the same time, that means two things. One, the price is likely to deviate more in terms of magnitude. But as a result, the people that are leaving are likely to get a lower price. And you may say this compromises the utility of the currency, but at the cost of some utility, there is the benefit of stability, long-term sustainability, I should say. Not stability, long-term sustainability, where the protocol is effectively burning or spending or sacrificing less liquidity in order to facilitate the same amount of Pinto being withdrawn from the silo and sold. So there's a soon there is the introduction, and there's been some chatter in the Discord about a convert bonus. And this is something we've talked about for years now, where historically we were never able, and here when I say we, I mean Publius, we were never really able to figure out a way to make the bonus system make sense. And in large part, this was due to the fact that there's an arbitrage opportunity, which we've spoken a bit about, where if there's a bonus, a convert bonus to convert from asset A to asset B, and you're holding asset B, if the grown stock bonus that you would receive from converting A to B is larger than the grown stock that you have on B, the incentive is to withdraw B, sacrifice the grown stock that you currently have on B outside of the silo, turn B into A, redeposit A or that value in the form of A into the silo, and then convert that A to B and collect the grown stock bonus, thereby increasing the amount of stock that you have. And so this arbitrage opportunity historically limited the amount of bonus stock that could be granted for a conversion. However, and I think this speaks to the quality of the minds now working on and iterating on the protocol, there has been a breakthrough in the design of the bonus system. And I think this is something that we should talk about more in the future. Don't want to use this time to go too deep into the bonus system at the moment, but want to highlight that as the bells and whistles on the mechanism get implemented, the convert penalty just went live, convert bonus is coming soon. These are the types of tools that should ultimately enable the protocol to better create the types of deviations from the value target that it wants to see. And this is both on the downside and the upside. Spoke a little bit about what the ideal deviation looks like on the downside, where it's short and fast. I think arguably more interesting place for inquiry is what about on the upside? What about deviations greater than the value target? And this is where the convert penalty gets really interesting. So, on the one hand, maybe before we go to the various hands, let's just talk about what's happened historically. Historically, there has been a significant preference for holders of the system or participants in the silo, depositors in the silo, to hold LP tokens as opposed to just holding directly Pinto, or in the past holding beans. And even with the current version of the gauge system, where the incentives are such that the highest seeds by far at this point are for holding Pinto as opposed to holding LP tokens. Right now, Pinto has 3.92 seeds, and Pinto USDC, which is the most seeds for any of the LP tokens, has 2.62 seeds. And so there is basically 50% more seeds on Pinto than there is for holding the highest LP token. And despite the fact that the protocol is willing to pay a significant premium in terms of grown stock over time for depositors to hold Pinto as opposed to LP tokens, and in effect, to go from LP tokens to holding Pinto, that would mean converting upward and thereby contributing to peg maintenance on the downside. Clearly, there is a significant preference from holders in the market to hold deposited LP tokens over deposited Pinto. And this is very interesting. I think one thing that you could say is, well, maybe just the gauge system doesn't work that well. And to that would say the current distribution of deposited LP in terms of PDV is pretty close. You can't say that it's perfect, but if you look, and maybe I'll drop some photos here in the town hall chat. Hold on. So this is from the Dune dashboard, which I'll also link. You can see that the distribution, and I'm sorry that the colors aren't perfectly aligned in terms of order, but this is a color mapping. You can see that for the most part, the distribution of LP tokens in the silo generally pretty closely, although historically it's been even closer, follows the target distribution of LP according to the gauge system. And if you look at the gauge points, what it tells you is that the gauge points have not changed anytime recently. And this is to reflect that even though it's not a perfect mapping from optimal distribution to current distribution, it is within the bounds of the gauge system, such that the protocol isn't even pushing anyone to act at this point. And so from this data, I look at this and say, well, clearly the gauge system has an effect. And within the LP tokens, we see that people are listening to the gauge system and following what the protocol wants. But on the other hand, clearly, when it comes to holding Pinto versus holding LP tokens, the same dynamic is not at play. That there seemed to be a very strong preference from market participants to hold LP over Pinto. And I think this comes from a general risk-off preference, where holding the LP is a more conservative set of actions for the long-term health of the protocol. And so it's a very interesting dynamic where, particularly changing the crop ratio, which happened a couple weeks ago, changing the crop ratio, I thought was likely to lead to people to convert, or if not likely to convert, it certainly was going to make it such that people were significantly more incentivized to convert upward. But even at a crop ratio of 150%, people have not been converting. And I think there's an open question. Should we raise the crop ratio even more? Very interesting question. But separately, the topic that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into is the dynamics around a convert penalty. So, in particular, what the system has experienced historically is, and Beanstalk in the past, is even after the system repegs, and it could repeg as a result of conversions, or it could repeg as a result of new demand, or as a result of just market movement across the general crypto market. Basically, there is a wall of converts downward. And at this point in time, we do not have a convert order book via Tractor, although hopefully that's coming soon, such that everyone can sort of see what that wall looks like and how much demand there would need to be in order to run through that wall and kick off some legitimate minting, or significant minting might be a better way to say it. But the result of having a significant preference across a significant amount of the users of the system to hold LP over Pinto is that as soon as the protocol reaches its value target and is above the value target, there seems to be a significant amount of demand to convert downward. And the result is that the protocol does not have basically any opportunity to mint. And there's a very interesting, I think, an open question as to whether or not any minting is desired by the protocol. Historically, the answer has been no, that the protocol has never expressed any preference to mint whatsoever. There's never been a fixed APY for holding Pinto. There's never been a target APY for holding Pinto or any other assets in the silo. And instead, the model is simply optimized around minimizing volatility of the price, maintaining a healthy amount of debt and a healthy amount of liquidity. But the result of the fact that there is this tremendous preference amongst holders to hold LP, and the fact that there is a 100% penalty for converting from Pinto to LP when the price is below its value target, means that as soon as the price increases above its value target, there is a competition to convert down. This is as a result of the fact that there's very minimal amount that can be converted down. You know, if the delta B is plus 10K, that means you can only even convert 20K of Pinto into LP. And so what ends up happening, or what has happened in the past, is that the protocol repegs, but it only repegs ever so briefly, and the time spent above the value target is approximately zero or very close to zero. There's effectively no minting. And then as a result, sometimes more people leave or just nothing happens. And the result is that there's no minting whatsoever. And historically, the protocol has been totally okay with this and has expressed no preference to actually mint a little bit. But there's been a significant amount of discussion amongst the developers and also in the Discord that perhaps this is suboptimal. That perhaps the best thing to do is to have the protocol mint a little bit. And that in fact, mints can be very healthy, particularly if the mints are not hard-coded that the protocol has to mint, but instead that the protocol wants to maintain its value target, and in particular wants to spend an equal amount of time above and below its value target. And so with this convert penalty, there's no notion of the protocol having a preference in terms of magnitude of deviations above and below peg. That is still true. But for the first time, the protocol is actually expressing a preference to spend an equal amount of time above and below the value target. And that is quite a change for the system. To be transparent, I don't know how I feel about this change. I don't know if doing so is actually optimal for the long-term health and sustainability of the system. However, I do appreciate very much the perspective that the protocol should be minting at some level, and it shouldn't be minting just to mint. It should be minting as a result of spending time above its value target, and the fact that there is potentially a series of incentives, a la a convert penalty and convert bonus, that could incentivize various participants of the system to act in such a way where the protocol is actually able to spend more or less an equal amount of time above and below the value target. And this is a really interesting change in the system and the model. So to basically summarize what the deal is with the convert penalty, there is now a new value. I'm wondering, can anyone chime in with the name of the value? I think we gave it a farming term, but I can't say that I remember what it is. Does anyone have that off the top of their head?
You might be thinking of the cultivation factor, but that was around the new soil issuance below peg. I don't think we have a term for the convert down penalty.
That is exactly right. Thank you, sir. Hence my confusion. So
the best we have at the moment is grown stock penalty factor, but name's welcome.
Boo, boo. Need more farming terms. Jokes aside, though, the way the penalty works is there is a curve that determines the penalty as a function of the current state of the system, meaning the effectively the health of the system. And that's primarily a function of the L2SR. And in this instance, at least. And notably, for the first time ever, there is now data over more than just the previous season. So now there is this, repeat it again, Austin, the grown stock penalty factor.
That's right.
What a name. The grown stock penalty factor is a look back over the past 12 seasons and beyond. So the way it works is anytime the grown stock penalty factor is at 12, that means that the protocol has spent the past 12 seasons above its value target. And in that case, the penalty is 0. On the other hand, if the grown stock penalty factor, I can't wait to use AI to replace me saying grown stock penalty factor with whatever farming term we add. But if the grown stock penalty factor is 0, meaning that the protocol has not spent any of the past 12 seasons above its value target, then the penalty is at its maximum. And the penalty is a function, again, of the health of the system. However, if it's not so binary that it's been 12 seasons above or 12 seasons below, the way it works is any season above peg, the grown stock penalty factor is decreased by 1, and any season below peg, the grown stock penalty factor is increased by 1. And therefore, this effectively serves as a historical look back as to the past 12 seasons and slightly beyond. The reason why it's not just over the past 12 seasons is, let's say that right now the grown stock penalty factor is 12, and over the next 12 seasons, the system spends 6 of the seasons above and 6 of the seasons below. At the end of the next 12 seasons, the grown stock penalty factor would still be 12. So the way to get it back down to 6 or in the middle would be to spend 9 of the next 12 seasons above the value target. I see Ford Pinto suggested slash. factor. I don't know how I feel about that one, Chief. I don't know if that's farming enough for my taste, but definitely interesting. Maybe like the pesticide. I don't know what's like harmful to crops. Maybe something like that. We digress. So the interesting thing here is that for the first time, the protocol is not just looking at data over the previous season and the current state. The protocol is also now looking back over the past 12 seasons, and per that fact that if we're 6-6, but we were at 12 before the past 12 seasons, we're still going to be at 12. In theory, it's also a reference to data further back than the past 12 seasons. And this is really interesting, where now, as opposed to, for those OGs who remember the Beanstalk state space document, that effectively that was an evaluation of what it meant to add another axis, in this case the L2SR, to the state space, but still exclusively was evaluating the state over the previous season and at the time that the sunrise was called. For the first time, the protocol is now looking further back, and not just looking further back, but looking further back with an opinion being expressed, where the protocol is effectively saying that before it is comfortable with people converting without any sort of penalty for doing so, the protocol wants to spend at least 12 seasons above the peg. Now, 12 consecutive seasons above the value target. Not peg. And I mean, I hate to keep saying this is so interesting, but from where I sit, it really is interesting, because the protocol is still not saying it wants mints per se. It's still not saying that it wants a certain amount of deviation above the value target in terms of magnitude. But it is saying, and I guess you could also say that it's not even saying it over time, in the sense that you could have oscillations above and below the value target within a season, but it is saying that it wants the time-weighted average price to be above its value target for at least 12 seasons before conversions occur in mass. And it's, in some sense, it is saying that it wants to mint some amount of Pinto. But on the other hand, it's not, because of the fact that it's not speaking about magnitude, or it's not, it doesn't have an opinion or any expression of opinion about magnitude of the deviation. It's not necessarily looking for mints as much as it is just looking for extended periods of time above the value target. However, in practice, this is going to make it such that the system is incentivizing minting. And this is where I think things get particularly interesting. Right now, the market cap is under 10 million. The price is relatively low volatility, although it is away from its value target. And independent of the introduction of a bonus or something that enables the protocol to return to the value target, now, once it does return to its value target, and it could be, again, because of conversions, because of new demand, because of market movements, the result is once the price of the Pinto crosses its value target, now the protocol is actually going to try to keep the price of Pinto at or above its value target by minimizing converts. Of course, there's no way to disincentivize sales. I can't say no way, but there's no way to do it without significantly compromising the utility of Pinto. You could obviously have like some sale penalty where if you sell shortly after a target cross, you actually get less cents on the dollar. But that seems to really compromise the utility of the currency. So just in terms of conversions, the protocol is now really trying to fight back against the situation, which is that there is a significant preference, as discussed, for depositors to hold LP over Pinto, and at least now saying, well, if there's going to be this competition to convert down, that competition should not start for at least 12 seasons. And the way that the curve works, as specified in PI 7, is such that the penalty decreases over those 12 seasons down to 0. And depending on the L2SR, the starting point is different depending on the health of the system. Where if, like in the current case, I think it would start at close to 100% penalty and then go down to 0%. Now, I see here Austin says, feels like the system is only explicitly saying that some people can convert without penalty and not others. Although I suppose the first time the peg crosses above peg and before it mints any new Pinto, everyone is subject to the penalty. So appreciate this nuance and clarification. So what Austin is referring to is the fact that because the penalty is exclusively a grown stock penalty and not a base stock penalty, where base stock, not technically a Pinto term, but it's the stock that you receive upon deposit. And then you obviously get seeds, and the seeds yield grown stock. The newest deposits that just received a mint, for example, have no grown stock, and therefore there is no penalty. Now, I think this actually makes a lot of sense in some sense. I know that's not the best English sentence you've ever heard from me, but it makes sense from the perspective that the new mints, we do generally want price discovery from the new mints. And particularly given that the new mints, particularly if small, are likely to be widely distributed across a variety of holders, it's not like any one participant can simply repeg the system downward without incurring a penalty. So after a single season of mints, let's just keep a super simple example. Let's say that the delta B was constant over the previous season and remains constant at the start of the next season. Call it plus 10,000 delta B, or it didn't even need to be constant. But let's say that the average over the previous season was the same as the delta B at the start of the season. Only half, or just under half, of that 10,000 new mint are going to get distributed to the silo, which means that the convert power is only about 2,500 or so. So this makes it such that even if all of the new mints converted, and we wouldn't expect that to happen under normal conditions where every new mint was converted instantly, I think open question what happens with Tractor. But the point is, until there is a series of mints such that the total amount of mints is something like 4 times the delta B, a little over 4 times the delta B. And this has to do with the distribution of newly minted Pinto to the silo and the fact that when you convert, the effect on delta B is half of the Pinto, because the Pinto is getting converted into half Pinto, half LP token. The result is that the protocol is generally creating a structure or an incentive structure where it is likely to spend some non-zero period of time above its value target now. I think something that's really interesting for me from a game theory perspective is the fact that there's minting significant? Like, let's say that there's over those 12 seasons before the penalty reaches 0. Let's say that the minting is 3 times the amount of mints that would be needed, or if everything were converted, it would return to peg. That is likely going to be a decent amount of mints, but not so much minting that it's going to create a crazy APY where it's likely to bring in a lot of new capital. So at least from where I sit, my expectation is not that the introduction of this penalty will suddenly cause the system to pump. However, what I'm very interested in seeing play out is whether or not this enables the system to spend more time above its value target. And if it's going to spend more time above its value target, is now, particularly with a complementary bonus system potentially being introduced, is it now the case that the system is likely to oscillate above and below its value target with much greater frequency than it has in the past? Or is the system going to fall into a similar pattern here, which is like not such instant deviations from the value target, and then longer downward deviations where over time the system repegs and then sort of quickly depegs again on the downside? Or is the system, once it repegs, more likely to spend more time oscillating above and below its value target? And if so, how long, if you will? Is it the 12 seasons over which the penalty exists? Is it 6 seasons because at some point the penalty is not high enough anymore to prevent the converts? This is a very interesting, and I know I've said interesting about a dozen times, but to me it really is interesting to see how the market participants will respond to this. So this change, it remains to be seen. Obviously, the price is still below its value target. We haven't had a crossing of the value target since this was implemented. But this change is the most out there, and I use the term out there both complimentary and derogatorily, just because it is a little scary to have the system now expressing a preference to spend an amount of time above its value target as opposed to just crossing it. It's going to be really fascinating to see how the system behaves during the next target cross. So that was the meat of what I wanted to use this period to speak about. Curious if people have questions, if people have comments or other analysis other than the analysis I've given here about this penalty system. Happy to answer questions or hear what other people have to say.
Excuse me. I think this grown stock penalty gauge, where it increments or decrements some value between a min and a max value, works pretty similarly to the current LP seed gauge point function for each of the whitelisted assets. So I'm curious why you feel like this is a new paradigm shift with respect to measuring data over more than the last season.
Great question. Two things. One, the LP gauge points change only as a function over the previous data over the previous season, which I guess you could say is the same as this thing. However, there's no notion of like a 12-season look back. It's simply just a relative change. The other thing, which I think is more substantive from where I sit, is the distribution
Can you clarify the first part? I'm not sure how it's different. In what way is this a 12-season look back versus the LP seed gauge point function being like 1,000-point look back, if you will? I mean, I guess it's a little bit different in the sense that now the gauge point function can adjust the gauge points by more than one. There's also a situation where it moves by 3 or 5. I'm not sure if that's the thing you're pointing out.
Well, the gauge points are relative, if you will. So it's not in the penalty system, this penalty gauge, grown stock penalty factor gauge. What a mouthful. The gauge only runs from 0 to 12. and increments or decrements by 1 every season. In the case of the seed gauge, each of the different deposited assets have a value that increases or decreases every season based on the LP distribution relative to the target LP distribution. And then out of that aggregate change, the new seeds are set. So in that case, the changes, one, it's not like there's a fixed range in the same sense. I guess it is like between 0 and 1,000 or something, but it's a radically different order of magnitude of the change. And then the other element is that the changes are all like, and the effect that it has on the seeds that exist ultimately is a function not just of the change associated with any given LP token, but across all of the LP tokens over the previous season, if that makes sense.
Right. Thank you.
For sure. I think I lost my train of thought, though. Does anyone remember what I was saying before that clarification was asked for?
Well, you said there was a more substantive point that you wanted to bring up with respect to why you think this as a paradigm shift. I think you're referring to the last thing you just mentioned is not as substantive. I don't know if that helps.
It helps, but it's unclear if it helps enough.
Apologies for interrupting.
No. It's all good. It's all good. We're having fun here. So let me think. Does anyone remember? I was saying more substantive change with respect to something. I think I'd already said what. It's okay if not. We digress. Yeah, I can't say I remember. Apologies. Was there a question I was answering before? Maybe that'll refresh my recollection. This is not great television, but what are you going to do? Go ahead, Austin.
I wish I knew.
All good. So the AI is not good enough to like remind me in my ear yet, but we're getting there. Give it another couple months, I think. The other point maybe to highlight about this is the change is not, I guess to your point, Austin, in the LP gauge, you have the changes in points, in gauge points. There's a magnitude element based on the deviation. In this system, there is no magnitude element. It's simply a binary. Was the TWAP above or below the, was the TWAP above or below the value target, and changing it by a single unit. And I think I recall what I was going to say. The thing is, whereas with the LP gauge, the system is making is expressing an opinion about the distribution of the LP. It's that the LP is not actually directly related to peg maintenance. That's the point I was going to make, where the distribution of liquidity is a secondary factor as it relates to peg maintenance. Meaning, based on the distribution of the liquidity, Pinto obviously inherits the volatility of its liquidity, but that's not a direct impact on peg maintenance. That's like more of a sustainability question as to preserving the value that trades against Pinto. In this case, this is the first time, I believe, that the protocol is instituting a gauge that is directly related to what I would maybe call, and I'm making up a term here, like first order peg maintenance. You could say it's second order, but if this is second order, because it's not directly about crossing the peg, it's about once it's crossed the value target, staying there for a period of time. So maybe it's not first order, it's second order. The LP distribution is like fifth order in this case. Like it's not the thing that matters nearly as much in terms of peg maintenance, if you will, or value target maintenance. I still got to get used to saying value target. Does that make sense? I know I lost my train of thought for so long there. It may not have come out totally coherently, but it did come back to me.
It does make sense. I feel like the main point is that the like delta B, or the price with respect to the value target, was only ever measured over the previous season, and this is the first instance of that being extended to seasons past that.
Exactly right. Thank you for your question, your interjection, and your help putting me back on track, Austin.
Anytime.
Are there other questions or comments about the penalty system and what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think previously you said that the cap of how much could be excessively minted was 4 times the delta P. I'm wondering where you got that number from.
Well, half of the mints, or just under half of the mints, go to the silo. And then even if all of the mints were converted, only half of the delta B would change. So it's 2 times 2 is 4.
So you're not including the harvested pods. You're assuming they would either not be harvested or not converted or deposited as negative Pinto.
That's a great point.
Like from my understanding, let's say if everyone's incentivized to convert in the first season, even with given they have no penalty, half of it will be converted by the pods, harvested, another quarter would be harvested. So with that time series over time, it'd be much less than like 4, maybe like 1.5, 2.
I would think it would then be 2 in that case, right? Because then we're sort of like in this, we're assuming none of the Pinto that is harvested are sold. They're just all deposited, and then everything that's deposited is converted. So that would basically have the effect of half of the delta B. So we would need double. Now, of course, that's probably not a reasonable assumption. Some of the pods that harvest are likely to be sold. So you're right that it's probably somewhere between 1.5 and 2. But that depends on the interest in harvesters for depositing in the silo versus selling.
Totally.
Great correction. Thank you very much, Free-Yo. While I have you, is it Free-Yo with a Y or Free-Ho, like a hard H? I know it's maybe short for Free-Hole, but I don't know. Free-Ho, Free-Yo.
Yeah, it's like Free-Hole, like frijoles, just shortened.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the correction. What other questions do people have about this?
You mentioned you don't think this will be enough, that if we cross over peg, there will be enough mints to like kickstart the protocol into a growth cycle. How would you consider changing the length of time based on the behavior of people after this goes into action the first couple times? Like, if people still convert right away and the convert penalty is not enough to disincentivize people, would you say that's okay? Or would you say that the convert penalty should be increased?
Maybe I'd say both, like from where I sit, it's totally okay if the protocol doesn't spend extended periods of time above its value target. That's not, that was never, we didn't put that into the original model because from where I sit, that's not the most important thing. It's more about long-term sustainability. However, at this point, given that we are trying this out, it is going to be very interesting to see at what point along these curves, which are specified in the PI7 documents, like, are people disincentivized from converting at any penalty, such that every time the protocol spends 12 seasons straight above its value target, or close to it, or to the extent that pods are harvested and sold such that the system repegs or crosses its value target as a result of harvest, but not converts. It's an open question. There's so many different ways that it could play out that it's hard to say in advance. I mean, the thing that will definitely be most interesting is to see the volume of converts for a given penalty rate and to try to get a sense of, at a given penalty rate, what is the likelihood that people convert. But at the same time, that's generally a subjective thing, which is going to be dependent on the particular farmer. So it could be that some farmers care so much, you wouldn't expect it 100% penalty for people to be converting, because then they could do that now anyways. But as we start to see, some people converting at 90 or 80 or 70, doesn't matter. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's so much demand for that. So instead, probably the most interesting thing will be to start to try to understand different participants in the system and their particular penalty factor preference, if you will. I think very interesting is the question of the length. Like right now, we're setting it at 12 before the penalty is 0. There's a question as to if there's printing happening, should we make it longer? But no, at this point, I'm more interested in seeing what happens than sort of pontificating about what we'll do next, because there's so many different ways that people could respond to this penalty, if you will.
Cool. Can I ask more of a broader question, not specifically related to the new convert down penalty?
Please, sir. Well, maybe just before we move on, is there any other questions about the penalty system? And we'll get back to you for it, Pinto. Going once. Going twice.
All right, I'm going to call it.
Hit it. You go.
How do you see the path to peg playing out over the next couple months? Do you think it'll be from
the path to peg? Why do you make it sound so hard, man?
I mean, I didn't say it was a mountain to peg. I just said it was a path. Like, you just walk along paths,
Sure. Touche.
You think it's a road to peg, downhill slope? I don't know what you would call it, or a target, of course, or crossing the target rather is more important than just being at it, I think. Do you see that as happening from? Do you see a snowball getting started? Do you see people converting for some reason? Do you see market pulling things back up to peg? Or just curious, like how you see this thing playing out and how the system is designed to play itself out, if that makes sense.
Well, currently the system is designed to attract lenders in the field to repeg itself or return to its value target. Now, with the change in the amount of soil available, it's been really interesting to see that for the most part, the state of the system has remained sort of the same. The temp has continued to increase, although it's increased slightly more slowly. But the available soil, which is now on the order of a couple hundred soil, continues to not be sown, or is not being sown every season. Part of me thinks that this is a function of the friction associated with sowing such a small amount, and particularly given that it's so small and you can't sow directly from deposits, there's a risk that you withdraw and then someone else sows before you, and that kind of sucks. So I feel like there's a lot of friction to sowing at the moment. But separately, the fact that the field has not been able to attract lenders is not a good indicator that the protocol is going to be able to borrow its way back to peg. At the same time, delta P is less than 500K, and at the current temp of just about 11x. So you'd say like a 12x on 500K. It's not so bad in terms of the amount of pods that the protocol would have to issue in order to cross its value target again. 12x times 500K is 6 million. So the pod line is at 32 million. In theory, that would grow it to 38 million. So it feels like a very healthy amount of debt for the protocol to issue at the moment, but there doesn't seem to be demand for it. Open question as to whether increasing the temp more, maybe if it doubled to 24x, plus I guess you get the multiplier on the price. So you get another like a 33% bump on that. So right now, even it's like a 16 plus X. People are not lending to the protocol. I don't look at that as necessarily a bad thing. It just means that the current temperature is not high enough to attract lenders. According to the OG model, this was really the only thing the protocol had to return to its value target. So it would need to find a temperature that people would be willing to lend to the protocol at in order to return to its value target. Or a new market participant would have to look at it and say the system's working well enough that they want to just ape in and independent of the field, if you will, and just participate in the silo. However, with converts live at this point, given the lack of demand in the field, and again, there may be a temperature at which there is demand in the field again, and I would certainly expect that to be the case at some temperature, because it's like when the protocol reaches a growth cycle, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a full growth cycle to 10x the supply, which would effectively pay off all of the pods in the pod line. Even if there was another 12 million pods added to the back of the pod line, so it was like 45 million. 45 million pods getting paid off would mean that the protocol grows to about 100 million. So that seems to me to be a pretty reasonable bet to make. At the same time, even if there's no demand for soil in the field, thanks to converts, there is still the opportunity to return to the value target, even if there's no demand in the field. Now, you ask, how do I foresee this playing out? Is it market volatility? Is it the field? Is it the silo with converts? I think something I really am interested to see is the introduction of a convert bonus and whether that has an outsized effect on conversions, and also interested to see potentially changing the crop ratio again, maybe from 1.5 to 2, or 150% to 200%, how that affects the protocol's ability to return to its value target. But I can't say that I have a strong opinion about which one is more likely. Like, is it more likely that the protocol finds a temperature at which it's able to borrow from the market and a snowball in the field starts? Is it more likely that convert bonus system is introduced and enough conversions happen to return the price to its value target? I don't have an opinion about which is more likely, but I see there being multiple paths back to the value target. And at this point, I feel like the system is very like slow and steady wins the race, if you will. Again, this goes back to what we started this town hall with, I guess, state of the game, excuse me, not town hall, where it's like the price is at 73 cents. What gives? But on the other hand, this is all part of the process. And the fact that the protocol is doing relatively well and we get all of this amazing data to experiment with, to me, it's all part of the process. So I don't have a strong opinion about, it's more likely that it happens through converts with a bonus, or it's more likely that it happens through the field. If I had to bet, I think a convert bonus is probably at the margin more likely to have a quicker impact. But I don't feel strongly about that whatsoever.
I see. Two things. You said no one's sowing in the field, but I look at the Pinto sown a month ago was like 10.9 million, and now the sown Pinto is 12.4. So that's like 1.5 million Pinto that was sown in the last 30 days. That's pretty good, I would say. And then the second thing, I I'm not sure I agree that the convert bonus will be enough to kind of like trigger a series of conversions because
Hold on,
like,
I lost you there, sir. Can you go back? I heard the first thing, but I did not hear the second thing. You dipped out, or
so,
I dipped out. One of us dipped out.
yeah, no problem. So the second thing is that I'm not convinced, or I don't think I agree that the convert bonus will kind of trigger a series of conversions, because any convert bonus will still give you fewer grown stock than if you like convert right now, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure what the benefit is. Like, if I'm sitting in LP, and I know that this bonus thing exists, or even if it didn't exist, and I'm trying to maximize my stock, wouldn't I go ahead and convert already to get more stock now? Because the bonus will give you not as much stock as if you had just been sitting in pure Pinto the whole time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess in the mental model I was operating with, this coincides with like a convert snowball effect as well, where the amount that can be converted and receive the bonus is capped, such that there is the potential for momentum in the silo, if you will. So I think it's more complicated than just the raw bonus. It's like the game theory around collecting the bonus, and are other people going to get the bonus? You know, right now, you're right, you get more stock for converting than the bonus, but there's also the potential that the price decreases more, such that your ability to earn a greater bonus in the future increases. So, not sure exactly how that slices, if you will. And separately, on the, there's still activity happening in the field. I look at the Pinto supply over the previous month, and the Pinto supply has basically flattened out over the previous month. And I think the date of the flattening, which is March 12th, was that when we made the change in the soil issuance? Does anyone know that off the top of their
Probably
head?
something around there. Yeah, it's been a couple
Yeah,
weeks.
so it's like if you look, and it was already decreasing the amount of demand in the field, but at this point, like, the decrease in the Pinto supply has really hit a snail's pace. So unclear whether that's a result of the temp, whether that's a result of the people that wanted to lend at anywhere close to this temp have already lent, or whether that's a fact that there's just a high friction right now, given the amount of soil, the lack of ability to sow directly from deposits, and the lack of tractor. But from where I sit, the field is not really cooking at the moment. Yeah, Pinto Pirate says PI6 was deployed on March 12th. So if we look at the Pinto supply chart, you can see the effect that this had. It seems to be quite significant. And I would argue, from a decreasing the supply factor, quite negative. Like, market cap is at 8 million. Protocol needs to remove, 3 million, or in excess of just under, for being exact, just under 3 million Pinto from the supply to return the supply to the market cap. And right now there's 200 soil in the field or something. So from that perspective, good luck, if you will. The field doesn't really feel like it's cooking. But at the same time, the way that the soil issuance works now, if people started to sow, the amount of soil would increase. So it's not like the field couldn't be effective. But right now, the field is not being effective.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
curious
I
to
think.
see how that changes with tractor. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I don't know. I mentioned this in one of the chats earlier this week, but I think the cultivation factor is just resetting way too quickly. Because there's been times where like I've seen, people are sowing on multiple consecutive seasons, and that soil does start to ramp up, and then there's just one season that they miss and they don't sow, and then maybe at one point I think it got up to what, like almost 3%, and then just instantly it just goes all the way back down to 1%. And because it's only able to rise by like 0.4% each season. But then like as soon as it doesn't get sown, it just kind of like it just resets.
And what do you make of that? Like, is your
Well, I
is your
mean,
thesis that the like if it went down less, that then there would still be more soil the next season, so people would continue to sow. Then it's like, why didn't they sow last season? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it
I bet they
changes
just went up
when
with the shooter.
tractor's in the picture. I think it's just more so to like to your point, Ben, of how as soon as that PI was deployed, like the demand or like the actual amount of Pinto sown has just totally decreased, and that's just because there hasn't been soil available. Because there definitely have been people sowing. Like if you look in the field channel, like all the sows are somebody sowing however much soil there was at that time.
But then it goes down because that didn't happen in a particular season, right?
Correct.
And so that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, what do you make of that? Like, why did that season occur? People are just not at their computer.
I mean, that's what it seems like to me. I mean, just looking at the sowers, it's like most of the same addresses just sowing repeatedly. I mean, it's hard to imagine they're like, oh, let's wait for the temperature to rise another like 2%, and then sow the next day.
Totally. I mean, I see Austin says in the chat, I think that introducing sow with tractor without support for using non-Pinto will have very little effect on the amount of sowing. On the one hand, I agree, but on the other hand, I do think for these depositors that are in this dynamic that Pinto Pirate is talking about, it may help them, but it's not gonna be the thing that makes it easy for like a new lender in the field to enter with new capital. I think that's a great point, Austin.
Yeah, I agree. My point is mostly about net new lenders with capital outside the system. I guess even with people in the system, like if you were going to sow by withdrawing liquidity from one of your LP tokens, one-sided as Pinto, I don't know. I feel like we would have seen more of that if we imagine that's what's going to happen when we add support for Tractor. Maybe that is happening a little bit. I feel like most of the sows I see these days are withdrawals from Pinto, deposited Pinto.
Well, it's one of those things like the more converts that we have, the more deposited Pinto there is.
That is true.
All right, we've gone 75 minutes. Can do a little bit longer, but want to try to keep these to be on the order of an hour, hour and a half max, and to just keep doing them regularly. So curious if anyone has any other sort of final thoughts on all this stuff that we've been talking about. And just want to say it's so wonderful to be engaging at this level of depth with so many people about the model. It's obviously quite a complicated system at this point, but it's it feels like it's really coming into its own. And to have people that are so deep in the model and able to engage so substantively about it is, for me personally, very validating. This has been a long 5 years, 4.5 years, and talking with everyone about this is so wonderful. Going once, going twice. All right, that'll do it for this Pinto State of the Game. We will speak soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.